Power creep is real and it is terrifying. And that was what was said by the Genshin community when Mawika first came out. Actually, frankly, is what was said by the Genshin community when Natlan first came out. So with quite a few characters showing up that seem to be benching old characters like Shilinen potentially benching Kazuha, Mawika potentially benching Arlecchino, Molani allegedly benching Neuvillette, although I don't think that's really the case. This seems to be a continuing trend, which does make sense because there's of course a gacha game where they do try to sell new characters by making them slightly stronger than old characters. We have a new one that is actually, in my opinion, the most terrifying power creep possible right now, and that is of course Iansan potentially even being better than Kujou Sara for Electro characters. That's crazy, because Sara gives crit damage, 60% crit damage at C6 for Electro characters. This is why she at least secured her niche as the Electro buffer in the game. Prior to Iansan's release, she was also the flat attack buffer in the game as well, and now it seems like Iansan has showed up with a new weapon, of course, afterwards, that has started to steal both of Sara's lunches, and that's kind of terrifying if you ask me. The crit damage buff also can't be snapshotted by anyone, whereas Iansan's flat attack buff, as well as Sara's flat attack buff, but basically the attack buffs coming from Iansan, they can in fact be snapshotted. And so that can make a difference as well, depending on who you are talking about. For example, Fischl, Beidou, Lisa, who we are going to talk about in a second. So, as a way to show you what's going on, I ran a series of tests, and I want to show you some footage of basically the buffing damage difference between running C6 R1 Symphonist Iansan versus C6 R1 Sky Harp Sara. But first, don't forget to subscribe, okay? 90-something odd % of y'all haven't subscribed yet, so maybe you should do that, because if you also like the video and subscribe and hit that bell icon, then you can be notified of the latest videos and, of course, live streams happening on the channel. Now, let's start off with Lisa, the first waifu, the best waifu, and I'm going to have a look at both her hold skill and her burst. So, starting off with her hold skill, we have Iansan's buff providing me with a nuke doing about 221,000 damage, as opposed to 197,000 damage with Sara. So, that is a pretty big difference right there for Lisa's nuke. That alone should already be kind of terrifying as to what Hoyo is doing. Meanwhile, when it comes to Lisa's lantern though, here's the weird thing. For some reason, the lantern is actually working a little bit more in favor of Sara, with the hardest hitting lantern tick that I've seen being around 27,000, whereas with Sara, it's 27,000 and a few more hundred. So, not entirely sure what the dealio is with that, but it seems like at least for 6 seconds in Sara's buff, she is in fact providing Lisa with more. But like I mentioned, Lisa's lantern is something that can actually snapshot the attack buff, meaning after that 6-second duration, if you don't refresh the buff with Sara on Lisa, then the lantern will then lose the crit damage buff, which will immediately swing everything in favor of Iansan as well. Moving on, we'll have a look at Clorinde, who is, I still think, the most fun character in the game. Let me know how you feel about that in the comments below. But when it comes to normal attacks, this is the weird thing with Iansan and Sara. So where Lisa seems to be heavily favored by Iansan, the opposite appears to be true. So with normal attacks, Iansan has provided Clorinde with what I could see as the strongest hitting normal attack, doing around about 43,500 damage. Whereas with Sara, typically I have seen 52,500 damage. That's a pretty big hit notice in aggravate damage at the very least, okay? So, I don't know how that works, but it is what it is. Meanwhile, when it comes to her ult though, here's the thing. Because Sara's buff only lasts for 6 seconds and you're popping off for usually around 7, if you decide to use Clorinde's ult at the end of your popping off window, then obviously it's going to run out of Sara's burst. So, or rather Sara's buff. So at that point, if the buff expires, then we have a base ult hit, and the hardest hitting tick out of the few ticks that it does is around about 57,000 damage. Whereas of course with Iansan, just having a buff that lasts a lot longer, you're pretty much easily going to be able to land 75,500 damage. That being said though, it's not all lights out for Sara, because if you were to then refresh the buff for Sara, depending on what you're using, if you're using something like Absolution, you have a 6-second window to refresh Sara's buff before you pop Clorinde's ults, which means it's still easy enough for you to get an ult that does about 84,500 damage. So as long as you are able to maintain Sara's buff, yeah, you're going to be able to get more damage out of Clorinde with Sara on the team as opposed to Iansan. Keep that in mind, because it seems to me that for some reason my Clorinde and the way I've built Clorinde, which is a whimsy build, is like the exception to this rule. Because if you have a look at Yae Miko, the illustrious, the wise, and the beautiful, then, well, here's the thing. When it comes to Miko's turrets, Iansan barely pulls through, with the aggravate hit doing around about 70,000 damage, whereas with Sara, the aggravate hit is doing 68,000 damage. But the bigger difference is actually coming from Miko's burst, which, by the way, doesn't have any ICD. I forgot to mention that in the Miko rerun video, but it doesn't matter. When it comes to running Miko's burst with Iansan, oh, you're going to get around about 119,000 damage, whereas with Sara, I'm seeing only 100,500 damage thereabouts. Pretty big difference right there from Miko's burst. And so I think when you put that all together, I think it is advantage to Iansan in this regard. Actually, there's advantage to Iansan no matter what. So yeah, like, we already have Lisa and Miko favoring Iansan, and that's kind of strange. And what's even stranger is the almighty Narukami Ogosho, God of Thunder herself, Raiden A. Because for the longest time, the reason why Sara was hard stuck on every single Raiden Shogun banner, including the upcoming one, is that because she was the buffer for the Raiden Shogun. And so you would imagine that Sara buffs A more than Iansan with Symphonist of Sense. Maybe it's something to do with my build, but for whatever reason, I am seeing more damage coming out of A, at least with the initial Musou no Hitotachi slash, than running Iansan on the team, than running Sara on the team. I don't know what's going on. With Iansan in a hyper team, we have 393,500 damage coming from Musou no Hitotachi. Whereas with Sara, it's 357,000 damage. What is going on? I can't explain it, and I don't know if you can explain it. Let me know in the comments if you have some way of explaining it. Meanwhile, though, when it comes to an overload team with, like, Chevy, well, strangely enough, Iansan can provide Musou no Hitotachi with a damage splat of like 365,000 damage, provided you're playing everything properly and sort of having a little bit of patience to get some damage percent coming out of Chevy. But Sara can still hit around about 370,000 damage. So the difference in that regard, actually not that different, but Sara is in fact pulling ahead. So it's kind of all over the place with regards to A. In a hyper team, yeah, you're probably going to want to play Iansan. In an overload team, I think you're going to probably want to play Kujou Sara. So it's weird. It's very, very weird if you ask me. Iansan is still a character that can work with quite a few of these Electro characters. Maybe not A as much, mainly because A doesn't move as much. Lisa can move, but she can also be very quick swappy, so it depends on who you're playing with the team. Clorinde obviously moves a lot. Miko actually does move a fair bit, right up until you swap out of her, of course. So Iansan is still viable in that regard, but do keep in mind that Kujou Sara has her buff tied to her skill, which does mean it is actually significantly easier to play with Sara. If you take that into account, then I suppose in the grand scheme of things, Iansan and Sara are basically equal with regards to buffing Electro characters. But on top of that, with Iansan, you do have some thresholds you need to reach before Iansan can be basically fully functional. You need to be able to hit 3,000 attack after everything is said and done. You need to be able to have enough energy to be able to use her ult on a regular basis. Whereas with Sara, yeah, you do want to use her ult on a regular basis, specifically because you can build Sara for DPS, and therefore EOSF Sara becomes an option as opposed to Iansan. Also keep in mind, in both of these tests, I am running scroll on as many characters as possible. If not that, then I'm doing something else. Like, yeah, Scroll is on Iansan, so that does play a role, but in the teams with Shilinen involved, Scroll is also on Shilinen as well, so I kind of just realized that I actually screwed up with the Raiden team. Maybe Kate the editor, you can probably show us what it looks like to run Noblesse Sara versus Noblesse Iansan? Sure. Hey everyone, it's Kate the editor. So, I also wanted to add a 4-second gap in my setup rotation. That way I can make full use of the C6 part of C6 Chevreuse, because that way we can do maximum damage with Musou no Hizotachi and get that damage percent from Chevy. And so when we do that, what you're going to see is you're going to actually see Iansan with Scroll end up with more damage than Sara with Noblesse, but it's actually more damage than Iansan with Noblesse as well, which does mean that in overload teams, it seems like at base, Sara is actually a little bit stronger than Iansan. One thing I want to point out though is that Iansan can make this a lot easier to do with regards to getting that C6 Chevreuse buff, because her buff, Iansan's buff, is of course a longer duration than Sara's. But yeah, overall, if you are a Letha main, Clorinde main, Varessa main, yeah, I think you might be better off building your Iansan to absolute max so that you can get a more versatile buff than if you were to build Kujou Sara. But at the same time, if you do manage to get C6 Kujou Sara and you have a high base attack weapon like Sky Harp, preferably, then I think you're still in a pretty good spot to build Kujou Sara, because she does seem to be more or less holding her own anyway, especially if you are in fact a Clorinde main. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. And no, I have tried lowering the crit damage in a variety of my builds. That doesn't seem to be making a difference. In the characters where Iansan still pulls through somehow, she's still pulling through somehow, and I can't explain how or what the threshold is in that regard. So it's weird. It's very, very weird. But I guess there's a lot of buffs coming from Iansan in form of a lot of attack percent, a lot of damage percent. Somehow that's all pulling through past the 60 damage percent that C6 Sara is also providing, because otherwise when it comes to just the flat attack, they're both pretty much equal in that regard. Alright, anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Ep action, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.